Pac-Man is one of those games that really doesn't need much of an introduction. Debuting in 1980, Pac-Man quickly became a classic game even in the early days of gaming. His yellow, disc-like appearance is so iconic that even people who don't game know what Pac-Man looks like. For my part, Pac-Man is a few months older than I am, so I've been aware of him since before I first picked up a joystick. I grew up playing variants of Pac-Man on my Amstrad CPC, and although I didn't see a Pac-Man arcade cabinet for myself until I was much older, I knew what the game was all about and how to play it. You will no doubt have a similar experience, so let's dispense with the introduction and get straight into taking a look at the game. The first thing that really hits me when I load the arcade version of Pac-Man is the sound. That intro music when you start a game is iconic in the truest sense of the word, as are the in-game noises. The blips and bleeps of Pac-Man are what I hear in my head when I think about arcade games. They fit so well with the game, and they really make the feel of Pac-Man what it is. The sound is atmospheric, but when you think about it, it's also pretty bare bones, giving you only as much as you need to be able to fully understand what's going on. The same could be said about the graphics. You have a bold, clear character in Pac-Man himself, and also with the ghosts. You know at first glance where you are on screen and where all of the enemies are in relation to you. The game may be a maze game, but you never get lost. It's always clear what's going on and what's going to happen. That's really good. It's excellent design. The ghosts themselves all have their own personality despite being a palette swap of each other. Some are fast, some are a bit slower. Some will go directly for you and hunt you down, while others will meander a bit. That's great, it gives the game a nice feel to it with individuality to the enemies. Although it's well worth remembering that these ghosts will absolutely hunt in a pack and corner you if you're not careful. I've lost far too many lives to that over the years. But if you keep your wits about you, you'll do well with a game of Pac-Man. It really is a battle of wits. It's you against the machine, and the machine has you outnumbered. You'll need to keep your hand on the controls and your eyes on the prize at all times. So it's a good thing that the controls are super responsive. Pac-Man moves on his own, you just need to flick the joystick in the direction that you want him to turn when you reach a junction, or if you want to double back on yourself. If you push the joystick at the wrong moment, it's very easy to overshoot the turn and glide straight past it into a ghost, so you've got to get some practice in if you're going to really master this game. It's one of those situations where the game follows the golden rule of arcades: easy to learn, difficult to master. But let's face it, you probably already knew all of this. There are few gamers around today who haven't got at least a passing familiarity with Pac-Man. It's an absolute classic for a very good reason. The game is just as much fun to play for a quick few rounds today as it was when it first came out in the arcades back in 1980. So given that the arcade version was so excellent, how did that move on into the home computer versions or home console versions? Well, there were several, and we're going to take a look at a very small selection today. So let's go straight in with a rather modern interpretation with the Namco plug-and-play device. I first picked up my plug-and-play device a couple of years ago, mostly because it had Pac-Man built into it, and I really wanted to give it a try as a result. This is a very nice implementation of the arcade classic, but it's not quite the same version as the original. This plug-and-play device is, unless I'm very much mistaken, a Nintendo on-a-chip system in a similar style to some of those Atari flashback consoles. It contains a compressed form of the NES console with a few games inbuilt on a special ROM. One of those games is a version of Pac-Man, but it's not the Pac-Man game that appeared on the NES. It looks similar, well, slightly similar, but it's definitely not that version. Instead, it's a version that appears to have been coded specifically for this plug-and-play device. The sound and graphics on this version of the game are brilliant, although you wouldn't be able to tell that from looking at the output on my own plug-and-play device, as I've really got to get into this thing and fix it at some point. So let's put aside the weird, grainy and crackly and glitchy and awful footage that I managed to record and have a look at this footage from YouTuber Another Ordinary, link in the description box. This footage demonstrates that the overall look and feel of the game is pretty much spot on. It's not a perfect conversion from the arcade, however. The AI is different. Watch how the red ghost Shadow moves at the start of the game as an example of that. In the arcade original, he moves to the left and then proceeds up the screen so that the player has a bit of time to ease themselves into the game when the round starts. On the plug-and-play version, that period of adjustment is extended because Shadow orbits the ghost's starting point for a while before starting to chase Pac-Man. Shadow is also noticeably slower and less aggressive in this version, as are most of the ghosts. The end result of that is that the plug-and-play version of the game is easier for younger and less experienced Pac-Man players to get into. That doesn't make it bad, it just makes it a bit different. Since we've just taken a look at a system that may very well be a Nintendo on a chip, it only seems right that we take a look at the original Nintendo itself. The NES version of Pac-Man is laid out in a very similar style to the plug-and-play version, with the Pac-Man maze on the left of the screen and the score, lives, etc. on the right. This makes sense given the screen real estate that's available. The original arcade had a vertical screen that allows for a long maze filling up most of the screen space. That just wouldn't be feasible on a home computer system unless the maze was flipped 90 degrees, and even then it would pose some problems for displaying the score, lives and so forth unless the maze was also squashed to allow an extra row of characters to be displayed. So given that you'd essentially be making the maze unfamiliar to Pac-Man players, and you'd also be squashing it, it therefore makes sense to just go all the way through and squash the maze down to fit into the vertical space of a standard 80s 4x3 TV display, which maintains the layout that people are familiar with and allows for the game information to be displayed at the side of the maze. That way you get the original experience and you can see all of the information that you need. It works out, and to be honest with you, I'm fine with it. So, putting all of that aside, the first issue that I had with the NES interpretation of Pac-Man is its colour scheme. Pac-Man is now orange instead of yellow, which really irked me, because that's just not the right colour. Now, I realise that there isn't a colour palette available on the NES that has both the range of ghost colours and Pac-Man's yellow colour, so a compromise had to be made. But come on guys, surely you could have decided to change the colour of something else like the ghosts, and you don't change the colour of your main character. It just seems wrong. Like if Nintendo had decided that Mario had to wear pink in Mario 3 because they really needed a bright cyan tone for one of the enemies of the game. Anyway, aside from that, the game plays rather well. The controls seem a little bit less responsive on the NES, so your timing when switching directions has to be spot on. But once you get used to it, and to be fair, I did get used to it pretty quickly, it all works out. The game is fun, and it's a very nice implementation of Pac-Man. So let's put that aside and move on to our final system for today. We'll stick with consoles, but come more up to date again by taking a look at the PlayStation 2 version. Back in 2005, on the 25th anniversary year of the game's debut, Pac-Man appeared on the Namco Museum 50th Anniversary Collection for the PlayStation 2 and other consoles of the day. Unlike with the plug-and-play device, this version of Pac-Man is a straight port of the original arcade ROM, running in a custom emulator on the PlayStation 2. Playing the original ROM using the PS2's controller sounds like it would work pretty well, and for the most part it does. The thumbstick control on the DualShock 2 is, as you would expect, very responsive, and that translates into an excellent control on the arcade game. But I have to admit, I don't always play this way, because there is one major drawback to using a thumbstick to control Pac-Man. It's far too easy to put a little bit of spin on the thumbstick, which results in Pac-Man overshooting a turn. The solution to this is to just use the D-pad, which is also really good on the DualShock 2. This gives precise control, just like using a keyboard control would if you were gaming on a PC. You can get really far into the game, even as a relative amateur, by using the D-pad controls, but it's at the expense of feeling like you're actually playing the original arcade game, and I have no doubt that if you had an arcade stick handy, it would work very nicely for playing this version of the game. Pac-Man on the PlayStation 2 is arcade perfect. Everything you loved about the original is here. The sights, the sounds, the gameplay, it's all perfect. If you have a chance to play this PS2 rendition of Pac-Man, I absolutely recommend that you give it a shot. It's the arcade game only on PlayStation 2, and for me, that is brilliant. In conclusion, it doesn't really matter which of these 4 versions of Pac-Man you play, you're going to get a pretty nice implementation of Pac-Man. For my part, I feel like the controls on the plug-and-play version are great, but the AI is a little different, which means that the game isn't quite as challenging as the original would be. The NES has the poorest controls, but you will get used to them quickly, and the AI is as good as the originals, so it's a nice version in its own right. Which leaves the arcade and the PlayStation 2 versions, both of which are essentially the same game. The PS2 controls can get a little awkward at times, like I said, but if you swap out the DualShock 2 for an arcade stick, I'm pretty sure that problem's going to go away. The arcade version, of course, is still the perfect way to play, but machines aren't always available, so that's a bit of a downside. But anyway, it really comes down to which version of Pac-Man you have available to you. For my part, I've been enjoying a lot of the PlayStation 2 version, but if you get a chance to play the arcade original, you really should, because it's still the best way to experience the game. And there we have it, Pac-Man, one of the quintessential arcade experiences. I highly recommend giving it a try on the original machine if you ever get the chance. But if you haven't got the chance, if it's not available, that's fine too, because there are some excellent home versions. The PlayStation 2, Xbox and GameCube versions, if you can get the Namco Museum. Original PlayStation had a Namco Museum as well, or at least a Namco collection that had Pac-Man on it. All of them are great. Grab a copy of the Nintendo version if you can. It's not bad. The colours are a bit off, and sometimes it takes a little time to get used to the controls. But aside from that, it's brilliant. And, of course, there is the plug-and-play version. It's pretty good. The feel of the joystick is great. It's a proper clicky-clicky micro-switch joystick, so it actually has a good experience. The AI is a little bit different, but you can get used to that as well. Either way, definitely give Pac-Man a go. But anyway, that is all we've got time for today, so thank you very much for watching. I hope you did like this, and if you did, remember to click that like button, share it with your friends so that they'll know a good game when they see it, and do subscribe for future videos, because there will be more in the future. But until next time, I've been Zoe Kirk-Robinson, you've been watching GameHammer Daily, and I'll see you tomorrow. If you liked today's video, please consider supporting me on Patreon. Thank you.